Welcome, everyone. Now that David's wife is here, we can start.
Carl's wife.
So welcome to the Graves Library. Can everyone hear me? Okay? All right. So that means they'll be able to hear you as well.
Good.
Okay. How many are here for the first time? Great. Welcome. Welcome. So these two gentlemen have been here. Carl a few times. David was here once before, but they've never been here together. Do you fight a lot as brothers?
Oh, all the time.
Uh-oh. Okay.
It's never ending.
So that's why we have them on separate. We have them separated.
There's some special brother therapy stuff that's been working pretty well.
So we are grateful to Paul Mahoney and his family for supporting this program. His wife, Patsy Bray Mahoney, passed away a couple of years ago, and the family wanted to find a way to honor her. So this is the Patsy Bray Mahoney lecture series. We also want to thank our tech guy in the back, Mike Kelly, and also the Graves Library snack team who provided your treats over here. So they even grew the strawberries, believe it or not. So our guest today, I will start with Carl. Is that okay?
Sure.
You don't mind? So born in New York City, Carl Little holds a degree from Dartmouth, Middlebury, and Columbia. We brought up a lot of the books that Carl has written, and the Art of Katahdin that you put together, both of you. So, and I think there might be one missing. So anyway, there's a few over there. So afterwards, if you want to take a look at their work, besides this gem that we're going to talk about. So Carl is the author of more than 30 art books, including the watercolors of John Singer Sargent, Edward Hopper's New England, and paintings of Maine. His book, Eric Hopkins, Above and Beyond, won the first John Cole Prize from the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance in 2012. Little writes for Art New England, Hyperallergic, Maine Boats, Home and Harbors, The Working Waterfront, Island Journal, and Ornament. When do you sleep?
In between.
So, and in 1921, the Dorothea and Leo Rabkin Foundation honored Little with a Lifetime Achievement Award for his art writing, and he lives and writes on Mount Desert Island. Or do you say desserts?
Well, there's the dessert school and there's the desert school.
Okay,
so.
Okay.
Baked Alaska or Sahara.
I always heard dessert is 2 S's, right?
Yeah,
so,
it is,
because it's more. You always want dessert. You want more dessert. That's how I remember it.
There you go.
Okay. So, guess what? Also, a native of New York. David Little is the author of Art of Katahdin, named a Best of New England book by the Boston Globe in 2013. He's a co-author with his brother Carl on Acadia and Paintings of Portland. I think that's the one we're missing. In 2017, he took part in a national symposium at Colby College, valuing the aesthetics of nature, the role of the visual arts in the American conservation movement. Little holds an MA and MFA in painting from the University of Iowa, attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, and has had residencies on Monhegan Island and the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. And he lives with his wife, Mickey, who is here somewhere, there, in Portland. So welcome,
Thank you.
both of
Thank
you.
you very
Thank
much.
you so much for being here.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks to Mary Lou, Mike Kelly on AV, and the Lewis Graves Memorial Library for the invitation to offer a sampler from the latest Little Brothers publication, Art of Penobscot Bay. David and I are glad to return to this fine library after many years. Art of Penobscot Bay is our 4th collaboration, following books, as Mary Lou mentioned, on Katahdin, Acadia, and Portland. Slowly but surely, we're trying to cover the whole state. This book was among the most daunting, about 1,000 images whittled down to 134 by 120 artists. We did a lot of hunting and gathering over the better part of a year and then made our selections.
In a nonfiction book project, especially with regard to main art, there are unexpected twists and turns, challenges, omissions, critical editing, research in many directions, fundraising, museum permissions, layout design ideas, outreach to experts, and publishers' input. With that in mind, Carl and I would like to give a shout out to the staff at Islandport Press, the book's designers, and especially our fearless editor, Genevieve Morgan. Also to the rights and reproduction staff at the many museums we contacted, and the individuals who helped financially to secure permissions from those institutions. Two of them are here today, Bruce Brown and Ann Zill. Finally, to all the artists that submitted work and personal anecdotes for the book, many thanks. For today's talk, each of us chose 10 images. Well, a few more, as a couple slides offer a twofer. We don't like to play favorites, but here we are.
As David and I made our final selections for the book, we solicited background information from the individual artists about their work. For example, about her bird's eye view of North Haven that graces the cover, Amy Peters Wood stated, "There is no greater joy than rounding the bend of North Haven and seeing the entrance to Pulpit Harbor." A veterinarian turned artist, Wood donates 50% of the profits from her art to environmental causes and organizations mitigating climate change and preserving wildlife corridors. And I just want to mention that Emily Boyer designed this wicked dynamic cover. This is Coming Home by Amy Peters Wood, 2021.
Can I interject one thing?
Sure.
This is about the size of the painting, too. It's a very large painting, but this is close.
Can I interrupt for one moment?
Sure.
She happens to be right here.
Oh, hey. Wow. Good. Jesus. Gosh. Oh, now I'm all flustered.
With this slide here, which looks unusual, we journey north to the upper reaches of the Penobscot River and its two main branches, the East and West Branch. These branches embrace Katahdin, greatest mountain to the Penobscot First Nation. We recognize and respect the indigenous peoples of the Penobscot Nation as stewards of Penobscot Bay and its 8,600 square mile watershed for at least 12,000 years. The surrounding coastline and islands served as an important gathering place in summer, where the Penobscot came together with their Wabanaki relations and allies, the Abenaki, Maliseet, Micmac, and Passamaquoddy. These two paintings are from the book Art of Katahdin, which brings up a personal anecdote. In 1977, I drove my uncle, the artist William Keenbush, up to Maine from New York City for the summer. Along the way, approaching the Bucksport Bridge, which the Penobscot goes right under, Bill said, "Before I forget, you should climb Katahdin." After dropping him off and on up to Roaring Brook Campground, I left early the next morning for Millinocket, breakfast, a bag lunch, water, and on up to Roaring Brook Campground. At age 26, I was fired up and set out. I completed the long day's circuit up to Chimney Pond, up the Cathedral Trail, up to Baxter Peak and across the knife edge to Pomola, and down the Helon-Taylor Trail, and then further on to my car. Driving homeward through Medway, where the east and west branches of the Penobscot join the larger river, I couldn't have imagined that 36 years later, I would write an art book about the great mountain and the splendid rivers that embrace it. And the top painting is the view of Mount Katahdin from the West Branch by Virgil Williams. And there's an interesting story that we tell, just I think in a footnote, about this painting being discovered in a farmhouse in West Virginia by a group of ladies, Sisters of Mercy from a church, and then how they ended up having it cleaned and getting in touch with a curator in Washington, D.C., and eventually Colby College acquired this, the Lunder Foundation purchased it at auction. It's a good story. The one on the bottom is by George Hallowell, and it's a view of the east branch of the Penobscot River with three of basically the mountains that adjoin. The one on the far right is North Traveler, part of the Katahdin Range. And this particular this is a very small sketch, and it was in the Maine State Library. I did a lot of my research for the book on George Hallowell there, because Myron Avery, who was part of bringing the Appalachian Trail up to the top of Katahdin, he basically left his collection of paintings of George Hallowell and all of his writings about that period and other periods. He'd left those at the Maine State Library. And all of the sketches and watercolors are now at Bowdoin College.
So David and I wanted to connect the bay to the Penobscot River. This painting by James Eric Francis, Director of Cultural and Historic Preservation for the Penobscot Nation, provided the perfect link. Francis was one of 3 indigenous artists commissioned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Museum and Archives in 2021 to create art for its permanent collection. His contribution, Atlantic Salmon, was inspired by the removal of dams from the Penobscot River watershed, the addition of fish passages, and the subsequent return of sea-run fish. For me, Francis says, letting nature be how nature is supposed to be is the ultimate place to go. The painting serves, in the artist's words, to welcome home the salmon, with each dot representing one fish. The fishing spear, which you can see there, he notes, is the cultural connection between his tribe and the salmon.
One of the first things Carl and I did in tackling this book was to try and figure out the width, length, and breadth of Penobscot Bay. We got some help from the Island Institute in Rockland. Quote, "Penobscot Bay is Maine's largest bay," Philip Conkling and his team write in the landmark book Islands in Time, measuring 20 miles across from Whitehead to Elaho and trending 30 miles north to the mouth of the equally grand river of the same name. The bay, they note, encompasses almost 1,000 miles of shoreline and encircles 624 islands and ledges. And then they brag, Penobscot Bay is the second largest embayment on the Atlantic coast of the United States after Chesapeake Bay. Lots of ground and water to cover. This detail is from a large pictorial map by cartographer and artist Ruth Rhodes Lepper from the Osher Map Library at USM. The aesthetics of this map lie in the creative orchestration of diverse elements and the designer's technical abilities. At the center of it is a marker on the island of Islesboro. Can you point that out, Carl?
Sure, yep.
It's right, yeah.
Right
it's
here.
right there.
The first scientific, go ahead.
Yep. At the center is a marker, illustration of the first scientific observation of the eclipse of the sun by Americans in 1780, just 4 years after the Declaration of Independence. This historical fact, discovered in Lepper's research for unusual events, it was not mentioned in the recent NOVA documentary called The Great American Eclipse that explored the 2024 total solar eclipse. The cartographer Lepper developed her love of map making as a cartographer for the U.S. Navy during World War II. Her superb draftsmanship can be found in 2 spiral-bound books, The Maine Coast from 1970 and the Boothbay Region Sketchbook from 1952. She said maps are precise, time-consuming projects, but if your work gives you pleasure, what the heck? And I think if you were to see I brought it with me here to show you just briefly, but it's a little hard to see this, but the map is huge. It was way too big to reproduce at a small image in the book, so we had to pick a detail. And when I looked over the map that they had there, this is the part that really stood out to me.
And just to mention the contemporary section of the book, so we started down here this way and moved up this coast and then went out to islands when we got to the towns where you get the ferry, and then we went up around, and this is sort of the trajectory of the book, ending with Elaho, I think.
Yeah.
Over there. And it does not, Penobscot Bay does not include Monhegan. Thank you, Lord. That's in Muscongas Bay. One of several American modernists featured in the book, Marston Hartley began. Marston? There he is. I probably jiggered something.
No.
One of several American modernists featured in the book, Marsden Hartley began his painting life in his home state of Maine and then returned after spending time in New York, the Southwest, Mexico, and Europe. Living an itinerant life, he drifted around Maine, the South, with stays in Georgetown, Bangor, Korea, and West Brooksville. Hartley spent the summer of 1939 in the latter village at Bagaduce Farm. While exploring the area, he came upon a log jam near the confluence of the Bagaduce River and Penobscot Bay, a forthright representation of flotsam and jetsam, a shoe, a barrel, and a lobster trap mixed with the clustered logs. Hartley's painting also documents an aspect of Maine's timber industry. As George Wasson noted in his 1932 book, Sailing Days on the Penobscot, logs often escaped from river drives and ended up on the shores of the bay, at times creating a navigational hazard. This is Hartley's Log Jam, Penobscot Bay, 1940-41, from the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Just a sec here. The Bates College Museum of Art, under the guidance of Hartley scholar Gail Scott, is developing a catalog raisonné of the Lewiston-born painter. You can see some of the work on the museum's website under the Marsden Hartley Legacy Project. One more note about Gail. When we went to look for a painting of Hartley's, she was the one who told us that this was the best version of this particular subject to use. And so I had to get permission from the Detroit Museum of Art to do it and go through, I think I had to go through ARS, the Artists' Rights Society as well. And then I have a short anecdote related to Hartley and involving me. In the mid to late 1990s, when I would drive to Patton to visit and paint with my buddy Chris Huntington and his wife Charlotte McGill, we would review their latest edition of the Carl Springhorn Society newsletter. This might trigger news of their discoveries at the Beinecke Library at Yale of a treasure trove of Marsden Hartley's correspondence with several friends of his arrival in Patton, trip into Katahdin Lake, and his 9-day experience painting and drawing the magnificent views of the mountain. Then they invited me to try my hand at transcribing Hartley's challenging handwriting late into the evening. It was a great experience, and I was able to complete the transcription of 2 or 3 letters.
Yeah.
It's so hard to do.
Yeah. Were there any spirits involved? No.
There always are. So this is still me. For marine paintings and ship portraits, we illustrated a half-dozen from the Penobscot Marine Museum in Searsport, including this painting by Bangor-born artist Waldo Pierce, painted in 1960, over a century after the ship in the painting, the John Carver, was built. In the Penobscot Marine Museum's educational video, the speaker, referring to this painting, tells how 20th and 21st century artists, authors, and families remembered Searsport's shipbuilding heyday. Here, with the help of available photographs and shipping records and his remarkable imagination, Waldo Pierce successfully recreates the worker bees stacking barrel staves, the team of oxen resting, the steam shed, blacksmith shop, fish weir out in the water, and much more. And I did want to mention that Pierce was good friends with Hartley and allowed Hartley to stay at his home in Bangor while working up his sketches from Katahdin Lake and pushing them into the larger really finished paintings that were, the biggest ones were 30 by 40. And those were all done in a separate studio, but he was allowed to stay on the second floor of Waldo Pierce's house. I keep bringing us back to Katahdin. I'm not sure why. I guess I really like it.
Our uncle, William Keenbush, started painting around Penobscot Bay in the 1940s. He spoke of his work as, quote, a translation, a language to communicate a world. Influenced by abstract expressionism and his heroes Hartley, John Marin, and Arthur Dove, Keenbush brought new energy to Maine subjects, including islands, bell buoys, seagrass, and ledges. Once the home of a granite quarry industry and the Outward Bound School, Hurricane Island was Keambush's favorite place in Maine. He would hire a lobsterman on Vinalhaven to drop him off for the day so he could wander the abandoned island, taking photos with his Brownie camera and making quick drawings to use as prompts for paintings made in his Maine and New York City studios. He likened the experience to a dream, an epiphany of nature, as art historian Donaldson Hoops put it, writing about Keambush's first visit to Hurricane in 1951. This is William Keambush, Across Four Pines, Hurricane Island, 1956, K-Scene from the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And I just want to note that Uncle Bill has appeared in many of our books. I have no idea how that happens. But I did want to say that he really gave us Maine. He really brought us up here.
So this next slide is me. This is the actual piece you're looking at. It's a very small piece of history, but it's one of 4 postcards that end up at the front of this book. One of the resources I relied on for visual and social history record of Penobscot Bay and its surrounding harbors, towns, archipelagos, shipping and sailing was antique postcards collected at paper shows in Portland. For this postcard titled Monoliths for Cathedral of St. John the Divine, Quarry at Vinalhaven, Maine, I was able to pin down an approximate date by finding a similar postcard with the stamp and cancel date of 1905. Then I found an article and interview with a member of the Vinalhaven Historical Society and the Associated Press, dated December 20th, 2001, and that was titled, St. John Divine Columns Got Their Start in Maine. I learned the columns were cut from the Wharf Quarry on the northwest side of Vinalhaven by the Bodwell Granite Company. The quarry was located on the side of a hill. Each column had to be built in 2 pieces. The top piece, 36 feet in length, weighing 90 tons, and the bottom piece, 18 feet, weighing 40 tons. The first 2 columns were shipped to New York City aboard the barge Clara Clarita, arriving in 1903. There were 8 massive granite columns in total, used to support the Cathedral of St. John the Divine's east end. Quite an engineering project to transport these columns about 400 miles safely from island to cathedral. And I think it's a good example of what Penobscot Bay, in a way, symbolizes was the granite quarry industry, travel by water, and then the engineering things of how do we get these things onto the barge, how do we get them off, how do we get them over on the west side of New York to this cathedral, and then how do they get them up in place.
Remnants of those granite carvings can be found to this day on Maine islands. Dick's Island, about 3 miles from Rockland in the Muscle Ridge Islands, is one such site. At its peak, more than 1,400 men lived and worked on the tiny island, mining and finishing the huge blocks of granite for federal projects. The U.S. Treasury Building in Washington, D.C., and the New York City and Philadelphia post offices were built largely from Dick's Island granite. This painting, Columns, by Colin Page, was prompted by a visit to Dick's Island. The Camden-based painter has focused on the working waterfront and views of the harbor and bay. When he took up sailing, he discovered a fresh perspective, a new painting territory on nearby islands. This is his Columns 2020.
It's not such a good reproduction, large. Oh well. When I saw this photograph, Rose Petals on the Beach, Great Sprucehead Island, Maine, July 1, 1971, illustrated in the large softbound aperture publication, The Color of Wildness, by Elliot Porter. It brought back sensory memories of my 2 painting trips out to Great Sprucehead Island, and also of large thickets of Rosa rugosa I have tried to paint along the shores of both Great Cranberry Island and Cranberry Point in Korea, Maine. Porter's book, Summer Island, Penobscot County, 1966, may be the finest book ever written about life on an island in Penobscot Bay. It's the work of an artist, writer, scientist, and naturalist, and definitely photographer, all wrapped into one incredibly thoughtful, well-crafted narrative interspersed with quotes from well-known New England authors. Here is a sample of fine porter, no pun intended. Quote, I wandered through the forests and bogs and alder thickets from dawn to dark, day after day and summer after summer, listening, searching, tense as a taut wire for the slightest vibration and flick of movement. Unaware of time, I moved through the day without plan or design, following the trails and random leads laid out by nature. At sunrise, I waded through dew-laden red-top grass that soaked my sneakers and legs, and crept through bushy thickets from which drops showered down on my face, neck, and back. Often I was drenched before the warming sun had dried the leaves. I went out in fog and rain all day and returned late in the afternoon without a dry spot on my body, but neither cold nor uncomfortable, end quote. Elliot Porter's brother, Fairfield Porter, spent a part of nearly every summer on Great Spruce Head Island. The family embraced it as a kind of northern Eden, a place that offered freedom to explore and grow and paint. Porter practiced what has come to be called painterly realism, marked by loose, expressive brushwork. The artist wrote of the important space between what painters can consciously control and what actually occurs in the process of painting. I want to read that one more time. The artist wrote of the important space between what painters can consciously control and what actually occurs in the process of painting. Porter often turned to friends and family for subjects, as in this painting, Girl in a Landscape, 1965, which portrays his daughter Catherine casually posing barefoot before the blue stretches of the bay. Porter liked being spontaneous while painting directly from life. In her review of Porter's posthumous retrospective at the Whitney in New York, the New York Times critic Grace Gluck noted how the painter tended to be blunt with the human figure, quote, yet his carefully composed studies of friends and family members in domestic tableau can't help projecting the warmth of his observation. She ranked Porter's work among the finest realist paintings produced in the United States since the end of World War II.
In 2004, while visiting Great Spruce Head Island from her home in Stockton Springs, Sarah Farragher explored nearby Bear Island. Conversing with an islander, she learned of Birch Lodge, a humble dwelling that could be rented in June. Invited to consider this option, Farragher soon found herself taking up annual summer residence in the middle of Penobscot Bay, her painting supplies at the ready, and her soul as well, brimming with the possibilities of retreat and reflection. In her Autobiography of an Island, a memoir, 2022, Farragher shares her experiences painting on Bear. In the book, she describes a number of specific paintings, including this one, Afternoon Shadows, Bear Island, Maine. Certain elements of the view, the dark open door of the boathouse, the clouds building up, a bank of rugozas casting a shadow over the island road, lend mystery to the scene. The painting feels like a stage set, Farragher wrote, and something is about to happen.
In 2019, Anina Porter Fuller, the niece of Uncles Fairfield and Elliot Porter, invited me back to Great Spruce Head Island for the annual Art Week. 12 artists, freedom to work, to explore the island and experience, quote, the silence and simplicity of island life with our shared flourishes of creativity, to paraphrase from Anina's website. To be there with Anina is special as she understands and shares better than anyone Fairfield's range of subject and interpretation. In Art of Penobscot Bay, I mentioned the challenge of getting underway, painting out of doors in light of the influence of Fairfield Porter's work. I had checked out this rocky beach just 2 minutes northeast of the big house and found a good composition for an early morning sketch. There was a streak of sea dazzle across the ocean from Peak Island that I managed to get in before it disappeared. No one came by. I used my viewfinder, which I brought in to show you, This is a viewfinder that was made by a friend of mine with a sliding panel, so you can really see what your composition is going to look like, the edges, as you start to put the edges into the edges of whether it's a panel or a canvas. I used my viewfinder to help find a view and keep within the borders of a vertical rectangle. 2 silent hours later, I had an impression that felt spontaneous. I titled that Landing Beach, Great Spruce Head Island, 2019.
I, too, spent a week in Anina's care on Great Spruce Head Island. As I walked up the path to the big house where the visiting artists and writers stay, I spied a snake, which triggered this following poem dedicated to Anina. And just one note, there's a reference to the mongoose Rikki Tikki Tavi from Kipling's The Jungle Book. This is small green grass snake, Great Spruce Head Island, Maine. Slithers through the grass, although that verb doesn't do its movements justice. Maybe glide or ripple or shapeshift, so delicate, thin, moving up the path just ahead of our footsteps. God or someone saw the shape in the grass and called it green grass snake, an easy ID compared to, say, Bactrian camel or nudibranch or ocelot, all part of paradise, which makes me think of the poor snakes of St. Croix, enjoying rain of a virgin island, looking up one day to find a mongoose in their path, which proceeds to rip them skin from skin, the carnivore imported to clean up Eden, a Rikki Tikki Tavi nightmare for the serpent crew, a kind of injustice played out by man playing almighty. Ghosts of those snakes rattle the dry corn shakes, while here, on this main aisle, a slim slider of a pale green hue that wouldn't know a mongoose from a molehill veers to the left in search of edibles in a northern kingdom of great spruce where no one holds dominion over nothing.
Carl, is that one of the ones that you read at night in the nighttime poetry readings?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And Nina Porter Fuller used to get people together, get the artists together who wanted to meet in the big room in the big house and to either express themselves by reading Fairfield Porter's poems or poems they had written or anything they wanted to. It was really fun. I participated and read one of Fairfield Porter's poems.
I always thought it was funny that they called the main house the big house. We're going to the big house. Okay.
Yeah, and it was big because it sleeps 12 artists. Yeah, and the staff. In his early years, the 1950s in Lincolnville, artist Alex Katz often turned to the local scene for inspiration, practicing a simplified aesthetic, reducing elements of the landscape to their essence. In his painting Clam Diggers at Duck Trap from 1956, 2 men rake the flats for surf clams, their motions seemingly choreographed against the bay and Camden Hills beyond. Katz once noted that painting outdoors at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture gave him a reason to devote my life to painting, he said. Well, I too attended Skowhegan School, and I concur with Katz's statement. The freedom to explore and set up outside in the landscape, for me, started a lifelong affair with Maine. Here is the first stanza of a poem, Advice to a Clam Digger by Wilbert Snow, who was born on Whitehead Island and did all kinds of things in his life. He was a politician, but he's really known for his poetry. He wrote several books of poetry, and then there was a selected and then eventually a complete set. Here's the first paragraph. Advice to a Clam Digger. Go when the friendly moon permits the tides to drop far out at early morn or eve, when eelgrass lies in windrows on the flats and rockweed lays its khaki counterpanes on barnacles that cling to sunken ledges. Seek out a place where mud-enameled sand looks like a colander whose holes emit little saltwater geysers when you step. Then, facing shoreward, dig till you become a lame and muddy partner of the cove.
New Yorker Stephen Pace had a home and studio in Stonington. Pace felt the liberating force of abstract expressionism, but in the end he used large brushes big canvases and fast, forceful gestures to turn that energy to representational subjects, wishing to transform but not relinquish reality. Stonington is one of the most active lobstering ports in the world. Captivated by the bustle, Pace frequented the town's waterfront, the docks, and the lobster co-op. Using a pastel palette similar to that of his lifelong friend, Milton Avery, and a lively, loose brush, he captured the action in his singular style. When Pace and his wife, Pam, moved back to his boyhood home in southern Indiana later in life, they donated their home in Stonington to the Maine College of Art and Design. And I have included two other Pace paintings here just to demonstrate sort of the challenges of David's in my selection process. We liked all three of these paintings to represent Pace. We ended up going with the one in the upper left, Leaving Co-op Pier, 1990. This is Two Clam Diggers, 1994, on the upper right, and below is Loading Bait, number 6, 1996.
And don't change it yet. On a personal note, when I was at the University of Iowa in the grad school program in 1975, I was asked to be the chairman of the Student Art Federation. One of my responsibilities was to take the visiting artists out to lunch. One of our lecturers was the artist Stephen Pace. I remember his first group of slides were of his early pen and ink drawings, done, as he said, with the goal of drawing in every state in the United States. He proudly showed the audience his favorite Mont Blanc pen, which he carried everywhere he went. Sometimes he would go down a dirt road to a dead end, get out of his car, and do a drawing of whatever was there, just so he could say that he was in that state. Then he showed a series of studies he did of a nude model seated up in a tree. Very strange indeed. That is what I remember.
And I did want to mention that there's a beautiful early Stephen Pace painting in the Modernism show that's at the Algonquin Museum right now, if you get a chance to get over there. On 700 Acre Island off of Islesboro, the famed illustrator Charles Dana Gibson, creator of the iconic Gibson Girl, set up his easel to paint scenes of summer life in the 1930s after he had mostly retired from illustration. In a lively view of the south side of Gibson Point, family members enjoy a sun-filled day on Penobscot Bay. Painter Abe Goodale is Gibson's great-great-grandson. Today, he paints in his forebear studio on 700 Acre Island, but the subjects are vastly different. Where the Gibson girls represented ideal women with perfectly coiffed hair, Goodale's portraits of fishermen, which he started painting in 2016, are true to life. In all his portraits, he seeks to pay tribute to the stalwart individuals behind what he calls this thriving yet fragile industry. This is 2018 Pause watercolor.
Brita Holmquist has long made her seasonal home on Islesboro. Her vibrant, often semi-abstract landscapes of Penobscot Bay are marked by lively brushwork that convey the flux of weather and the tilt of the horizon. Asked about painting from observation or memory, the artist replied, quote, "I work outside looking at what I'm painting. Then I bring a canvas into the studio and correct it. This may be for color or balance. So, memory enters in the studio for the color and imagination for the balance." Let me read that again. So memory enters in the studio for the color and imagination for the balance. In this storm's aftermath, Holmquist painted rapidly to fix the dramatic lighting and construct the breakup of the storm front, expressing with great vitality the elemental power of nature. Storm Passes is the title, 2014.
We have several wife and husband artists in the book, including Emily and William Muir from Stonington, Susan and Joshua Adam from Castine, and this pair, Nancy Morgan Barnes and Robert Barnes from Searsport. The couple lives in the historic John Carver House in Searsport, former home of a well-known 19th century shipmaster, in fact, the same one for whom the ship in the earlier Waldo Pierce painting was named. Fittingly, Morgan Barnes, the upper left, has painted the town's Mack Point port where large container ships tie up. This is her unloading the clipper Melody, 2003. A year after retiring as professor of art at Indiana University in Bloomington and settling in Searsport in 2001, Robert Barnes created a series of K-scenes called the Penobscot, consisting of enigmatic coastal scenes. One of them, the Mackerel Run, Belfast Harbor, 2002, features a group of figures fishing from a bridge while a boat passes in front of them. The scene is almost frenetic in its energy. And last but not least, Finnish-born painter Väinö Kola moved to Deer Isle in 1995 upon retiring from his longtime teaching position at Wheaton College in Norton, Massachusetts. His landscapes have a cool quality, the palette tuned to northern hues. In an often chaotic, violent, troubling world, there is a clear need for art, he told critic Kristen Andresen in a 2006 interview, adding, "It touches our soul, reminds us who we are, and helps us regain our center." Kola's paintings testify to the truth of these words. And I wanted to mention that Väinö is the subject of a major show that opened a few days ago at the Zillman Museum of Art in Bangor. If you're up that way, you should not miss this.
Here's the final paragraph of our introduction to Art of Penobscot Bay, to bring you back to the cover. Today, Penobscot Bay, in all its resilient glory, continues to attract and inspire a multitude of artists. As we write these words, someone is setting up an easel overlooking Camden Harbor, or has his or her eyes fixed on a stretch of coastline or that distant island. The waters flash, the fog obscures. Snow lends light to a midwinter view. These painters share the glory with all of us. We invite you to expand your visual horizons and enjoy these visions of Penobscot Bay, beauty, breadth, and beyond.
All the while, a dedicated group of conservation organizations led by the Island Institute makes it their mission to steward the resources of Penobscot Bay, including those vistas that draw artists from around the world. We thank them for working towards a future where waterfronts are working, the seas sparkle, and the land takes us in. Thank you. We mentioned that it was daunting putting this collection together, and it was even more daunting to just pick 10 pieces, each of us. There's so many paintings in this book that we'd love to talk about. You'll have to get the book, clearly. But we're glad to take questions if anybody has a question. It's usually like, how come you didn't include so-and-so? Oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This will be one like that.
Okay.
It's a mundane question, but I wondered how you got the actual images. There must have been some photography involved. I mean, how did you get the images?
Well, I can answer part of it, but Carl did the contemporary section, so those slides, those digitals came directly from the artists themselves, and usually sent in by through the internet. And I think, is that right, Carl?
Yeah, or a gallery would share them.
But we were able to raise, for my part of it, the deceased artists and getting permissions from museums and historical societies and so on. There are usually 2 fees that you have to pay unless you're asked to also pay the ARS fee, which is usually $100 for one piece. But the 2 that you basically have to pay for are the rental period, which you can use this image in, and for the actual digital image itself. Those are 2 separate things. And having done Art of Katahdin and Art of Acadia, I have lots of experience in reaching out. I've even had on the phone someone who says, I remember you way back when. That was 10 years ago we did that. So some of those people are still in the museums. And when Carl and I look, we look in a lot of books to try and find. And in the example of Fairfield Porter, we really didn't want to do his landscapes because they're so well known. We wanted to focus on figures and bring the figural element into our talk. So it was, once we picked those 2, I had to go to the museums where they are. And in that case, I think I had to go through ARS with both of them, as I did with Edward Hopper.
John Marin.
Yeah, there's a couple of them that where the descendants have rights. And what they do is they file with the Artist Rights Society. And it means that every time a piece is asked to be borrowed, the borrower pays $100 and then they get a cut of it. And Artist Rights does more. But they also hold a legal thing that if something goes wrong and they steal the image, they can go after them. That's all a legal part of it. That's, you know, I don't know how many times it's happened, but I think it has happened. And that could be even where someone doesn't know they're doing it. They didn't realize that they had to go through ARS. So it's a good thing to check if you're going to a museum to find out. And it's so easy for me. I got to know everybody at ARS.
Yeah, an example of that is there's a wonderful Louise Nevelson show at Colby right now. And I went over to take some notes for a review, and I was walking around, and a couple of pieces in the show you're not allowed to photograph. You can photograph some things, but some things are off limits. But Dave, I also wanted to compliment, David has managed to talk the price down in a few cases.
I did. In the Art of Katahdin, I had a choice between, I really wanted to put the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Marsden Hartley in, but they wanted, I think it was $350, which is actually about the maximum that I got asked. Actually, this is the first example. There's another example. Yeah. But the first example was that I ended up going to the museum in Kansas City where I got a similar motif of Katahdin, a big 30 by 40 by Marsden Hartley, and I got it for, I think, $200. And I just said, wow, well, in that case, I can rebalance my budget, because I had asked for $6,400 from Down East Books, and they sent it to me in 2 checks. So I had more money to work with, and I did do that with a number of places where I would just say, well, they're choices. And the one in our book is the Timken Museum in California, in Southern California. They had this incredible painting by Fitzhenry Lane of Castine Harbor. It's one of the most beautiful paintings of his I've ever seen. And when I saw it, I went, oh God, I gotta call him up and find out if I can get it. And when I was on the phone with the lady who was handling rights and reproduction, she said it's $500. And I said, oh, that's too bad. And so I waited and waited and wondered, what am I going to do about that? So months went by, and then I got 50 because I really did want to get this thing pinned down. So I called back and said, could I talk to whoever's in charge? And I got the lady who was the head of rights and reproduction, and I told her the story of how the most expensive painting I had paid for was $350, and that I was surprised by this price. And I said, is there any chance that you would go down on your price to $350? And she said out loud, sold! So that was really good.
Any other questions?
Have you had anyone say no when you've asked for work?
No.
Good.
Not in terms of museums, no.
Yeah, good.
Some of them, it's a little bit more of actually, the one issue that I had with the painting of Fairfield Porter, I had a note to say, but because Carl had this lovely flow to his poem, I didn't include it. But that was from a bank in Mississippi. And when I got in touch with a lady there, Carol Sturm, she wrote back and said, well, I am in charge of this, but I have no idea when a reproduction can be made. The actual painting is hanging in the CEO's office, and we'll have to arrange all that, so it might be several weeks before you get it. And that really put me uptight, because I already was kind of late in my deadline of trying to get the Fairfield Porters in place. But eventually she did call back, because I had said in my note, you know, you can take one with your iPhone and it'll be fine. But anyway, she got a professional photographer to go in and photograph it. And it's almost a life-size painting. It's 48 by 48, so it's a big, big painting of that young Katie out in the sunlight.
Yeah.
The painting of the lobsters being welcomed back. What size is it, or where is it?
The which one?
The lobsters being welcomed back.
Oh, that's part of the U.S. wildlife collection. It's in West Virginia, I think.
Oh.
Yeah.
You talking about the salmon?
He did it on James Francis.
The salmon being welcomed back.
Yeah. Yep. He's a wonderful artist, by the way. Look him up, James Francis. He's incredible. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. Thanks for
Yes.
coming.
Of the cover again, because
Sure.
I have,
Yep.
I've got a photograph.